My friends, I want to talk to you today about something that so many people are struggling with: loneliness. You can be in a crowded room and still feel alone. You can have 100 people around you, and yet your heart feels empty. Some of you are facing long nights of silence, wondering if anyone cares, if anyone sees your pain. But I have good news for you today. God sees you. He has not abandoned you. The same God who formed you in your mother's womb, the same God who has counted every hair on your head, is with you right now. The world may turn its back on you, friends may leave, family may disappoint, but Jesus said, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." Hebrews 13:05. No matter how deep your loneliness may be, God is deeper still. No matter how dark your isolation may feel, the light of Christ can break through. Today I want to show you that loneliness is not the end of your story. It can be the beginning of something greater. Because in your isolation, God is calling you closer to Him. In your pain, He is preparing you for something more. Will you open your heart to Him today? This introduction sets the tone with urgency, compassion, and a call to faith, just like Billy Graham would do. Let me know if you want any refinements. Loneliness is something that every single person will experience at some point in their life. It does not discriminate based on age, status, or background. It can affect the young and the old, the rich and the poor, the successful and the struggling. A person can be surrounded by friends, have a good job, and even be admired by others, yet still feel an aching emptiness inside. Loneliness is not just about being physically alone. It is about feeling unseen, unheard, and disconnected from the world around you. It is one of the deepest human pains because we were never created to be isolated. From the beginning of time, God designed us for fellowship, for relationships, and for connection, first with Him and then with one another. Yet in this broken world, loneliness has become a painful reality for many. There are times when loneliness comes upon us suddenly, like the loss of a loved one, the end of a relationship, or a move to a new city where we don't know anyone. But other times it creeps in slowly. We don't even realize it at first. We get caught up in our daily routines, drifting further away from people, convincing ourselves that we're just too busy or that others wouldn't understand what we're going through. We tell ourselves that we don't need anyone, that we are fine on our own. But deep down, in the quiet moments, when there's no one around and the noise of the world fades away, we feel it. That ache in the soul, that longing for someone to truly see us, to truly understand us. Loneliness can feel like a prison, trapping a person in their own thoughts and emotions. It creates a space where doubts grow, fears multiply, and hope begins to fade. The enemy takes advantage of these moments, whispering lies that say, "You are forgotten, no one cares about you, you are completely alone." And if we are not careful, we begin to believe those lies. We start to withdraw even further, sinking deeper into isolation. We stop reaching out, stop praying, stop believing that things can change. And yet, no matter how deep the loneliness feels, no matter how far we think we've fallen, God is still there. He has not left us. He has not turned His back on us. Even some of the greatest figures in the Bible experienced loneliness. David, the mighty king, wrote in the Psalms about feeling abandoned and alone. Elijah, the great prophet, sat under a tree and begged God to take his life because he felt like he had no one left. Even Jesus, in His humanity, experienced deep loneliness. When His disciples fell asleep in His greatest hour of need, when Peter denied Him, and when He hung on the cross crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Loneliness is not a sign of weakness, nor is it a punishment. It is part of the human experience. But the good news is that it does not have to define us. Many people try to fill the void of loneliness with temporary solutions, distractions, relationships, achievements, or even harmful habits. But none of these things can truly satisfy the longing inside. The only lasting cure for loneliness is found in a deep personal relationship with God. When the world leaves us empty, He is the one who can fill us. When people fail us, He remains faithful. When we feel invisible, He reminds us that He sees every tear, hears every prayer, and knows every burden we carry. God never wastes anything, and even in seasons of loneliness, He is working. Sometimes He allows us to walk through loneliness to teach us something, to strengthen us, or to draw us closer to Him. It is often in the quiet moments when there is no one else to turn to that we finally open our hearts fully to Him. He uses those moments to speak to us, to shape us, to prepare us for something greater. What feels like a season of isolation can actually be a season of transformation if we allow God to work in it. There is nothing wrong with desiring companionship, friendship, or connection. God created us for those things, but we must first learn to find our fulfillment in Him. If we place our hope in people alone, we will always be disappointed because people are human and they will fail us. But God will never fail. He is the friend who sticks closer than a brother. He is the one who walks with us through the valleys and leads us beside still waters. Loneliness does not mean that something is wrong with us. It does not mean that we are forgotten or that we are unworthy of love. It is simply a reminder that we were made for more than what this world can offer. It is an invitation to seek the one who is always with us, to lean into His presence, and to discover that even in the loneliest moments, we are never truly alone. God sees and knows your pain. There is not a single tear that falls from your eyes that He does not notice, not a single cry that escapes your lips that He does not hear. In moments of deep loneliness, when you feel like no one understands, no one cares, and no one is there to listen, God is closer than you think. He sees you in your quiet moments of despair, in the nights when you cannot sleep because your heart is heavy, in the times when you feel invisible to the world. You may feel forgotten, but God has never taken His eyes off you. There are times in life when people let you down. The ones you thought would always be there walk away. The friends you trusted don't return your calls. The people you sacrificed for seem to have no time for you. It hurts, and the pain of rejection, of feeling like you don't matter, can be overwhelming. But while people may fail you, God never will. He is the one who has been with you from the beginning, the one who formed you in your mother's womb, the one who wrote every day of your life before a single one came to pass. When you feel abandoned, remember that the God of the universe knows your name, He knows your story, He knows every detail of your life. In Scripture, we see time and time again that God cares for the brokenhearted. The Bible says in Psalm 34:18, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." This means that your pain is not overlooked. Your suffering is not ignored. God draws near to those who are hurting. He does not turn His back on you when you are in pain. He comes even closer. He understands loneliness. He understands betrayal. He understands rejection. Jesus Himself was despised and rejected by men. He was abandoned by those closest to Him. He was falsely accused, beaten, and left to suffer alone. Yet through it all, He never lost sight of His Father's love. And just as the Father was with Jesus in His darkest hour, He is with you in yours. Sometimes when we are in pain, we wonder why God allows it. We ask, if He sees my suffering, why doesn't He take it away? But what we often don't realize is that even in our suffering, God is working. He is shaping us, refining us, teaching us to trust Him more deeply. Pain has a way of drawing us closer to God in ways that comfort never can. It strips away all the distractions, all the things we thought could satisfy us, and leaves us face to face with the one who truly can. It is in these moments that we come to know God, not just as a distant figure, but as a personal, loving Father who walks with us through the valley. When you feel unseen, remember that God sees you. Think about Hagar in the Old Testament. She was cast out, left wandering in the wilderness with no one to care for her. She felt abandoned and hopeless, but in her desperation, God appeared to her. He spoke to her. He reminded her that she was not forgotten, and in that moment she gave Him the name El Roi, the God who sees me. That same God sees you today. He knows the depth of your pain, the weight of your burdens, the silent prayers you whisper when no one else is around. God does not just see your pain. He also has a plan for your healing. He does not want you to stay in a place of despair. He calls you to bring your burdens to Him, to lay them at His feet, to trust that He is working even when you don't understand. He promises that one day He will wipe every tear from your eyes, that sorrow and pain will be no more. But even now, even in the midst of your struggle, He is offering you His presence, His comfort, His peace. You may feel like no one cares, but God does. You may feel invisible, but He sees you. You may feel unheard, but He listens. And He is calling you to come to Him, to trust Him, to let Him heal the wounds that no one else can see. Because no matter how deep the hurt, no matter how lonely the road, you are never truly alone. Jesus is the answer to isolation. No matter how lonely you feel, no matter how many people have walked away from you, no matter how deep the emptiness in your heart, Jesus is right there. He has always been there, and He always will be. The world may tell you that you need more friends, more attention, more success to fill the void, but the truth is, nothing and no one can fill that space except Jesus. People will fail you. Circumstances will change. But Jesus remains the same, yesterday, today, and forever. There are moments in life when isolation feels unbearable. You wake up feeling alone. You go through the day with a heavy heart, and you wonder if anyone sees the pain you carry. You may be surrounded by people, but still feel unknown, unnoticed, unloved. That kind of loneliness runs deeper than physical isolation. It is a loneliness of the soul. It is the feeling that no one truly understands what you are going through, but Jesus does. He understands in a way that no one else ever could. He walked this earth. He experienced the struggles of humanity. He knew what it was like to be rejected, to be abandoned, to feel the weight of suffering. Think about the night before Jesus went to the cross. He was in the Garden of Gethsemane praying in agony. He had asked His closest friends, His disciples, to stay awake and pray with Him, but they fell asleep. In His most desperate hour, when He needed them the most, they were not there for Him. He felt the sting of loneliness, the pain of being forsaken, and yet He still chose to go to the cross. He still chose to suffer, to die, to carry the weight of sin, so that you would never have to be truly alone again. He took on the ultimate isolation so that you could have eternal communion with God. When Jesus cried out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He was experiencing the separation from the Father that sin had caused. For the first time, the Son was completely alone. He bore that loneliness so that you wouldn't have to. He made a way for you to be in relationship with God, to never be cut off from His love. That is why, no matter how lonely you feel, if you have Jesus, you are never truly alone. His presence is with you. His Spirit lives inside you. He is the friend who sticks closer than a brother. The world will offer you temporary solutions to loneliness. It will tell you to distract yourself, to stay busy, to seek validation from others, to find comfort in things that will never satisfy. But all of those things are empty compared to the love of Christ. The peace that He gives is not like the world gives. The joy that He offers is not dependent on circumstances. His love is constant, unshaken, unchanging. When everything else in life feels uncertain, He is the solid rock on which you can stand. Sometimes loneliness is God's way of calling you to Himself. When the noise of the world fades away, when the distractions are removed, when the people you relied on are no longer there, you are left with Him. And that is not a bad place to be. Because in those moments you come to know Him in a deeper way. You learn to hear His voice. You learn to trust Him more. You learn that His love is enough. Jesus invites you into a relationship, not just a religion. He does not just want you to know about Him. He wants you to know Him personally. He wants you to bring your burdens to Him, to talk to Him like a friend, to walk with Him daily. He wants to fill the empty places in your heart with His presence. And when you truly know Him, loneliness loses its power over you, because you understand that no matter what happens, no matter who stays or who leaves, you have someone who will never forsake you. The enemy wants you to believe that you are alone, that you are forgotten, that no one cares. But that is a lie. Jesus sees you, He loves you, He is with you. Right now, in this very moment, He is calling you to come to Him, to lay down your loneliness at His feet, to let His love heal the places in your heart that have been wounded, to trust that in Him you will always have enough. Loneliness can be a season of growth. Though it may feel like an unbearable burden, a time of isolation is often when God does His greatest work in your life. It is in these moments, when distractions are stripped away and you are left alone with your thoughts, that He speaks the loudest. When you have nowhere else to turn, when the people you once relied on are no longer there, when the noise of the world fades into silence, that is when God calls you to a deeper relationship with Him. Throughout Scripture, God has used seasons of isolation. One of the greatest lies of the enemy is that your loneliness means God has abandoned you. He whispers in your ear that if God really loved you, He would have given you the relationships you long for, that He would not have allowed people to leave you, that He would have surrounded you with companionship. But that is not how God works. He is not just concerned with your temporary happiness, He is concerned with your eternal growth. He sees the bigger picture, and sometimes what feels like abandonment is actually preparation. Sometimes He removes people from your life because He wants you to depend on Him first. He allows isolation not to hurt you, but to strengthen you. In the moments of loneliness, you have an opportunity to build a faith that is unshakable. You have the chance to develop a relationship with God that is not based on external circumstances, but on a deep personal trust in who He is. The more you seek Him in the silence, the more you will hear His voice. The more you lean on Him in the emptiness, the more you will feel His presence. The more you trust Him in the waiting, the stronger your faith will become. Some of the greatest spiritual breakthroughs come in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when no one is applauding, when no one is there to reassure you. It is in those times that you learn to hear God's voice above all others. It is in those times that you realize He is not just a God of the mountaintops, but also of the valleys. He is not just the God of celebration, but also of solitude. He is not just the God of crowds, but also of the individual heart that cries out to Him in the night. Loneliness does not have to weaken your faith, it can strengthen it. It can become a time of deepening trust, of refining character, of growing closer to the one who will never leave you. If you embrace this season with faith instead of fear, you will come out of it stronger, more grounded, and more aware of God's presence than ever before. Because while people may leave, while circumstances may change, while loneliness may come and go, the one constant you can always rely on is God. And when your faith is built on Him, nothing can shake it. Loneliness is not the end of your story. It may feel like a heavy weight pressing down on your soul, like a shadow that follows you wherever you go, like a silence that echoes louder than any noise. But the truth is, loneliness is only a season, not a permanent condition. It is not a sentence handed down to you without hope, nor is it a punishment you must endure without purpose. God does not allow suffering without reason, and He does not let His children walk through the valley without a promise of something greater on the other side. When you find yourself in a place of isolation, it is easy to believe that this is all there is. The enemy wants you to think that your life will always be this way, that no one will ever truly see you, that you will always feel this emptiness inside, but that is a lie. The enemy wants to keep you trapped in despair because he knows that if you ever truly understood what God is doing in your life, you would rise up stronger than before. He wants to convince you that you are forgotten, but God says, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Isaiah 49:16. He wants you to believe that you are alone, but Jesus says, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Matthew 28:20. Loneliness is not the end. It is the place where new beginnings are often formed. It is in the quiet seasons, in the times when everything else is stripped away, that God prepares you for what is coming next. Joseph spent years in a prison cell before he was elevated to second in command of Egypt. Moses wandered the wilderness before he was called to lead a nation. Even Jesus spent time in the desert before stepping into his ministry. These were not wasted years. They were seasons of preparation, times when God was working behind the scenes, shaping them for the plans he had in store. Right now, you may not understand why you feel alone. You may be asking God why he has allowed this season in your life, why he has taken people away, why doors have closed, why you feel like you are standing in an empty place with no clear direction. But just because you do not see the full picture does not mean that God is not painting something beautiful. Just because you do not have all the answers does not mean that God is not working all things together for your good. One of the most dangerous things about loneliness is that it can lead to despair. It can make you believe that you have no purpose, that your life does not matter, that things will never change. But do not let loneliness define you. Do not let it convince you that your story is over. God is still writing your story, and he is not finished yet. He has plans for you, plans for hope, for a future, for something far greater than what you can see right now. If you are in a season of loneliness, do not run from it. Do not try to fill the void with things that will only leave you emptier. Instead, use this time to seek God like never before. Let him fill the empty spaces in your heart. Let him show you that his presence is enough. When you truly understand that God is with you, that he is for you, that he has a purpose for this season, loneliness loses its power over you. Your story does not end in isolation. It does not end in despair. It does not end in loneliness. God has more for you. He has people you have not met yet, opportunities you have not seen yet, blessings you have not experienced yet. But first, he wants you to trust him. He wants you to rely on him more than anything or anyone else. He wants to show you that he is not just the God of your past or your future. He is the God of your present, right here in the midst of your loneliness. You may feel like you are alone right now, but you are not. God is with you. He has always been with you, and he always will be. He is leading you, guiding you, preparing you for what is to come. And when this season ends, when you step into the next chapter he has prepared for you, you will look back and see that he was there all along, working, shaping, and strengthening you for something greater than you ever imagined, to prepare his people for something greater. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before he was called to lead Israel out of Egypt. David was anointed king as a young man, yet he spent years alone in caves, running for his life before he ever took the throne. Elijah sat under a tree, feeling utterly alone, before God revealed himself in a still, small voice. Even Jesus himself spent time in solitude, 40 days in the wilderness before beginning his public ministry. These moments of isolation were not wasted. They were times of refinement, of preparation, of deepening faith. When you feel lonely, it is easy to focus on what you lack. You may long for companionship, for understanding, for someone to walk alongside you. But what if, instead of seeing loneliness as a curse, you saw it as an opportunity? What if, instead of running from it, you embraced it as a season where God is doing something in you that could not happen any other way? Often it is in the quiet, in the stillness, that we learn to hear his voice more clearly. God does not allow seasons of loneliness without purpose. Sometimes he removes people from your life because he wants to become your primary source of comfort. If you always had someone to turn to, you might never learn to fully rely on him. When everyone else is gone, when the phone stops ringing, when the invitations stop coming, you are left with the one relationship that truly matters, the one between you and your Creator. And in that place, you begin to understand that his presence is enough. Growth happens in the quiet places. A seed does not sprout the moment it is planted. It spends time buried beneath the soil, unseen, taking root before it ever breaks through the surface. In the same way, God often does his most important work in your life in the seasons where you feel hidden, unnoticed, and alone. He is developing your character. He is strengthening your faith. He is teaching you to trust Him in ways you never have before. If you resist this season, if you try to fill the emptiness with temporary solutions, you may miss what God is trying to do in you. Many people try to escape loneliness by rushing into relationships, filling their time with meaningless distractions, or numbing their pain in unhealthy ways. But none of these things bring real fulfillment. They may provide temporary relief, but they do not satisfy the deep longing of the soul. The only way to truly overcome loneliness is to allow God to use it for His purpose, to ask Him, Lord, what are you trying to teach me in this season? How can I grow closer to you? When you shift your perspective, loneliness is no longer something to fear. It becomes something to embrace. It is in these quiet seasons that God prepares you for what is ahead. He strengthens you, matures you, and deepens your relationship with Him so that when the next chapter of your life begins, you are ready. You may not understand it now. You may not see the purpose in the pain, but God sees the bigger picture. He is working behind the scenes, shaping you into the person He created you to be. Loneliness is not meant to last forever. It is a season, not a destination. And like every season, it has its purpose. If you allow it, this time of isolation can become one of the most transformative periods of your life. It can be the place where you draw closer to God, where you discover who you truly are, and where you are prepared for the greater things that He has in store for you. Because even when you feel alone, you are never really alone. God is with you, working in ways you cannot yet see. Loneliness is an opportunity to strengthen your faith. It is in the moments when you feel most alone, when you feel as though no one understands, when you wonder if anyone truly cares, that your faith is tested in the deepest way. It is easy to trust God when life is full of companionship, when relationships are strong, when love and support surround you. But what happens when all of that is taken away? What happens when the people you relied on are no longer there? It is in those moments that you must decide whether your faith is built on circumstances or on an unshakable foundation in God. Throughout Scripture, we see that God often allows His people to walk through seasons of loneliness, not to harm them, but to draw them closer to Him. Abraham had to leave behind everything he knew, trusting that God would lead him to a new land. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison. Yet he never lost his faith that God had a greater plan. Paul, one of the greatest apostles, spent time in prison, abandoned by many, yet he remained steadfast in his belief that nothing could separate him from the love of Christ. These moments of isolation were not wasted. They became the proving ground of faith. When you find yourself in a season of loneliness, you have a choice. You can allow it to weaken your faith, to cause you to doubt God's presence, to make you question His goodness. Or you can use it as an opportunity to seek Him more deeply, to rely on Him more fully, to grow in ways that only isolation can bring. Faith is not built in times of comfort. It is built in times of trial. When everything else is stripped away, when there is no one left to lean on, that is when you discover if your faith is truly rooted in God or if it was dependent on the people around you. God allows these seasons to teach you that He alone is enough. If your faith is only strong when life is good, then it is not faith at all. Real faith is believing in His goodness even when you cannot see it. It is trusting in His presence even when you feel alone. It is standing firm in His promises even when your heart is breaking. Loneliness can either drive you away from God or it can drive you straight into His arms. The choice is yours.